When a devoted caregiver loses the man she protected, she's left with one final promise: to make his neglectful family face the truth they buried beneath comfort and denial. But when justice arrives, it doesn't roar. It whispers. The House That Remembered is a haunting, cinematic tale about betrayal, legacy, and the thin line between revenge and redemption. Watch as silence turns into truth, grief into strength, and loss into something achingly beautiful, a story that will stay with you long after the credits fade. The house was too quiet. Not the gentle hum of anticipation that usually accompanies an empty home, but the oppressive kind of silence that presses against the ears and crawls along the skin. Outside, autumn sunlight poured through the windows, gilding the dust motes that danced lazily in the warm air. Inside, everything smelled faintly of antiseptic and old wood, a scent that made my chest tighten. Victor's house had never felt like a prison before, but today, after they'd gone, it did. I sat on the edge of his worn armchair, one hand tracing the delicate grooves in the leather, the other holding a letter I hadn't yet dared to open. Brady and his family had left for the week, packing their suitcases with careless laughter and sunscreen, leaving behind the man they claimed to love but had abandoned. I could still hear their voices in my head, Brady's flippant jokes, Elaine's sharp critiques, Melissa's idle complaints. But Victor's quiet coughs, the soft groans he hid behind the closed bathroom door, those were the sounds that lingered, and they made my resolve harden. Rose, moving slowly through the rooms I had come to know intimately. In the kitchen, the cupboards were neatly stocked, untouched for days, the refrigerator half empty. Every plate they left dirty on the counter, every abandoned prescription in the medicine cabinet, felt like a betrayal carved in ceramic and glass. I picked up a small photo frame from the counter, a snapshot of the family at the beach, smiles stretched wide, sunburned shoulders glistening in the afternoon light. Victor wasn't in it. Of course he wasn't. He had always been the invisible man at the edges of their joy, the man whose presence was a duty rather than a delight. In the living room, I knelt beside the fireplace, arranging a stack of cream-colored envelopes and folders. Each piece of paper was a testament, a quiet rebellion against years of neglect. Cancelled appointments, bank statements, photographs of his dwindling meals, letters of complaint that went unanswered, everything laid out like a chessboard. I imagined Brady walking through the door tomorrow, thinking the man he ignored for decades was gone, just another inconvenience resolved. They wouldn't expect the reckoning I was preparing, the quiet, meticulous justice that would greet them like a storm. I paused at Victor's empty rocking chair. Its cushion sagged from years of use, the wood polished smooth by hands that had weathered more than anyone deserved. I ran my fingers along its arms, feeling the faint pulse of memory. I remembered the way he had poured himself a glass of port on his birthday, the pride in his eyes when he spoke of small victories no one else noticed. His dignity was something I had fought to preserve in these last days, a fragile flame I shielded against the wind of their indifference. The clock ticked slowly, each second a drumbeat in the silence. I could almost hear the echo of tomorrow, the slam of car doors, the scrape of luggage on the driveway, the casual greetings that would crack and splinter when confronted with truth. My heart beat faster at the thought, but it was a calm excitement, not fear. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with me. It belonged to Victor. To the man who had taught me that even in the quietest corners of the world, justice could be shaped, carefully, deliberately, like a sculpture from stone. I folded the letter finally, pressing it gently into its envelope. Against the mantelpiece, I positioned it beside the family photograph, the silent accusation of absence mirrored by the promise of revelation. I straightened, took a deep breath, and let the house settle around me, carrying its weight like a secret pact. This was not just a waiting game. It was a beginning. And tomorrow, when the sun rose over the driveway, nothing in that house would ever be the same. A morning crept into the house like an uninvited guest, pale, slow, and impossibly still. I hadn't slept. Instead, I sat at the dining table surrounded by the fragments of Victor's life, old photographs, handwritten notes, the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the fibers of his favorite sweater draped across the chair beside me. Every object in that room felt like a heartbeat waiting to stop. Victor's absence wasn't loud, it was subtle, woven into the quiet. His cane no longer tapped across the hallway tiles. The tea kettle didn't whistle at exactly 8:15. The radio wasn't humming through old jazz records while he read the paper. I had never realized how much those tiny rhythms stitched meaning into the day until they were gone. A week ago, when I promised him I'd finish what we started, I didn't fully understand what that meant. Now I did. He hadn't wanted revenge, not really. He wanted acknowledgement. He wanted them to see the life they had ignored before it was too late. And somehow, that task had fallen to me. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and looked at the clock. 10 hours. That's how long before Brady and his family returned from their cruise, bronzed, self-satisfied, and ready to play the part of mourners. I imagined Elaine's perfume preceding her into the hallway, her diamond bracelets clinking like applause for herself. I pictured Brady's grin, all charm and calculation, his hand inevitably reaching for mine as if to steady me, the practiced gesture of a man who could feign empathy in a heartbeat. Once, I might have fallen for it again. Once, I had believed his warmth wasn't an act. But after these past months with Victor, after watching how easily Brady's family turned neglect into routine, I saw it all clearly. There's a cruelty that doesn't scream, it simply forgets you exist. A sudden gust rattled the window panes, snapping me out of my thoughts. I went to the living room, drawn by instinct, and found myself standing before the mantel again. The letter waited, silent and steady, beside that smiling photograph. Brady's arm looped around his mother, his wife, Melissa, pressed close beside him. Their happiness looked permanent in the photo, but permanence, I was learning, was often just illusion captured in good lighting. I adjusted the frame slightly, straightening it by a hair's breadth. Then I turned on the television. Victor's video was cued, his face frozen mid-expression. His eyes, pale, intelligent, still soft despite everything, met mine from across the screen. If they ever come back, Jade, he'd told me during our final conversation, don't raise your voice. The truth is loud enough. I smiled faintly at that. He'd recorded the message himself the day before he passed, sitting upright in his rocking chair, wearing his best blazer. Even in the end, he refused to be pitted from outside. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Life continued, ordinary, indifferent. I looked around the room one last time, making sure everything was exactly as it should be, the evidence laid out in order, the folders marked with precision, the air holding that strange mix of peace and anticipation. By afternoon, the clouds began to gather. The golden light from the morning had dulled into a muted gray, the kind of color that feels like a held breath. I felt it too, that tightness in my chest, that waiting. But beneath it was a steadiness, the same calm I'd seen in Victor when he signed his final documents. It wasn't the calm of resignation, it was the calm of completion. I went upstairs and packed my small suitcase, only essentials. As I zipped it closed, my reflection in the mirror caught my eye. There was something unrecognizable there, not colder, just cleaner. As if grief had burned away the excess. Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed softly. Each strike felt like a countdown. I exhaled slowly, whispering into the empty air, almost time, Victor. The house held its breath with me, the sound came first, laughter. It floated through the still air like a foreign language, bright and careless, utterly wrong in this house of shadows. Then came the muffled slam of car doors, the squeak of luggage wheels over concrete, the clatter of keys. They were home, stood in the living room, every muscle taut, palms cold despite the warmth of the afternoon. Through the gauzy curtains, I could see Brady hoisting a suitcase from the trunk, his shirt unbuttoned at the throat, skin sunburned, smile confident. Elaine emerged behind him, phone pressed to her ear, her oversized sunglasses reflecting the house she hadn't entered in weeks. Melissa trailed behind, quieter, thinner perhaps, holding her daughter's hand, the only innocent in the entire tableau, stepped back from the window, letting the curtain fall. The letter on the mantel caught the light, a quiet beacon waiting to ignite everything. The front door swung open without a knock. "Honey, we're back." Brady's voice rang through the house like a bad memory. He stopped mid-step when he saw me. For a second, confusion flickered across his face, then recognition, then something darker, calculation, Jade? His tone sharpened. What are you doing here? Where's Dad? I met his eyes. Victor's gone. Elaine pushed past him with a rustle of silk and indignation. Gone where? She asked, scanning the room like she was looking for a misplaced vase. He passed away 2 nights ago, I said quietly. The silence that followed was almost violent. Brady's suitcase slipped from his hand. Elaine froze, her mouth parted. Melissa's daughter looked up at me with wide, uncomprehending eyes. No, Elaine said finally, as though the word could undo time. No, he couldn't have. He was fine when we left. I could have reminded her about the cancelled nurse visit, the half-doses of medication, the untouched meals. But I didn't. I let the truth hang there, still and heavy. Brady's voice broke the quiet, low and uncertain. You held the funeral without us? Yes. I didn't look away. His friends came. The neighbors. People who still remembered him as more than an obligation. Brady flinched like I'd struck him. Then, just as quickly, he straightened, smoothing his shirt, his mask sliding back into place. You should have waited. That wasn't your decision. You're right, I said. It was his. I gestured toward the mantel. He left you something. Elaine's heels clicked sharply as she crossed the room. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the envelope, but her voice was steady. A letter. How dramatic. When she tore it open, the paper crackled in her hands. I watched her eyes dart across the lines, the practice control on her face beginning to fracture. Her breath caught on a single sentence. I knew the line Victor had rewritten 3 times to get exactly right. I forgive you for leaving me, but I cannot forgive your forgetting. Elaine lowered the page slowly. Brady hovered behind her, reading over her shoulder. His face changed first, a flicker of guilt, then defense, then anger. You made him write this, he said to me, voice rising. You poisoned him against his own family. I took a step forward, my calm unnerving even to myself. He didn't need my help to see you clearly. Elaine's hand shook as she set the letter back on the table. This is absurd. We were his blood. And yet, I said softly, I was the one who held his hand when he died. The words landed like glass breaking. For the first time, no one spoke. Even the air seemed to draw back. Melissa's daughter began to cry quietly, tugging at her mother's sleeve. Brady turned away, running a hand through his hair, muttering something about lawyers. But I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was looking at the photograph above the fireplace, the one I hadn't noticed before, now slightly crooked, as if the house itself had exhaled. Everything was shifting. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was revelation, slow, undeniable, like sunlight creeping through a locked door, and as I stood in that heavy silence, I realized that what came next would not just expose them. It would change me, too. Thunder rolled low across the horizon as Brady paced in front of the fireplace, the letter trembling in his hand like a confession he refused to read aloud. His voice cracked under its own weight. You filled his head with lies, he said, eyes darting to me as if searching for something to blame. I stood still, the quiet between us louder than any accusation. He knew exactly what he was saying, Brady, I replied. He planned every word. Elaine laughed, brittle and cruel, but her voice faltered near the end. Victor couldn't plan his way out of a grocery list by the end. Her perfume filled the room, sharp as regret. From behind her, Melissa whispered, Mom. I saw him last month. He looked bad. Elaine's glare silenced her, but the damage was done, the cracks had begun to show. I crossed to the coffee table, lifted the remote, and pressed play. Static flickered, then Victor appeared on the television, sitting tall in his rocking chair, dressed in his navy cardigan. His voice, frail yet unyielding, filled the house. If you're watching this, it means I've gone before I could say goodbye properly. Maybe you'll say Jade convinced me to do this, that I was confused. But the truth is simpler. I was lonely. And I was afraid to admit it. Every holiday I spent waiting by the phone, every appointment I canceled because no one would drive me, I forgave all of it, until forgiveness started to feel like begging. Elaine's hand flew to her mouth. Melissa began to cry quietly. Victor paused, his breath shallow. I don't want apologies. I want honesty. When you look around this room, I want you to see what you left behind, not the house, not the money. Me. His final words came like a closing door. If love is measured by presence, then I died loved by one person, and it wasn't my son. The video ended. No one moved. Brady's face tightened, then he lashed out, grabbing for the remote. This is insane. He was sick. I caught his wrist before he could throw it. He recorded that 3 days before he died. And he wanted you to hear it. Our eyes locked, his full of fury, mine hollowed by truth. You think this makes you right, he hissed. No, I said. It just makes you seen. Behind him, Elaine muttered prayers that dissolved into sobs, while Melissa stared at the floor as if she could find another version of the past there. Outside, rain began to fall, each drop tapping against the glass like a clock counting down to something inevitable. Brady exhaled, his voice barely above a whisper. You'll regret this, Jade. You don't know what you've started. Maybe I didn't. Maybe justice, once set in motion, devoured everything in its path, including the ones who summoned it. But Victor had asked for truth, not peace, and I had given him that. Lightning flared, bleaching the room in cold white light, and for a moment, his photograph above the mantel seemed to glow, steady, unblinking, eternal. I wasn't sure if it was approval or farewell, but it felt like both. Rain fell harder now, the kind that blurred the world into trembling glass. The lights flickered, and for a second, we all stood in a half-lit room that looked like memory itself, fragile, unfinished, already fading. Brady had gone quiet. The rage that had filled the air minutes ago had thinned into something colder, quieter, far more dangerous. He picked up the letter again, his eyes moving across the paper as if searching for a line that would absolve him. There was none. His voice broke through the storm. You think this is justice, he said, still staring at the page. You think humiliating my family, dragging his ghost into this house, makes anything right? I didn't answer. The question wasn't really for me. He looked up, eyes glistening, his defenses cracking like wet paint. He left me nothing, he whispered. His own son. Nothing. Elaine reached for him, but he pulled away, clutching the letter like it might burn through his skin. All my life, I did what he asked. I followed his rules, built the business, carried his name, and in the end, he gives everything to a stranger. His voice shook, the bitterness rising to the surface. What does that make me? I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. It makes you the person he hoped would show up, but never did. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Then, from the hallway, Melissa's voice came, a soft, almost a whisper. Dad, he didn't leave you nothing. We turned to see her holding another envelope, smaller, sealed, with Brady's name written in Victor's trembling handwriting. It was in the box, she said. You never looked. Brady took it slowly, the air thickening as he tore it open. A single sheet of paper slipped out, dampened at the corners. He read it under his breath, the words shaking him. Then he spoke, voice breaking, Son, if I left you nothing, it's because I already gave you everything I knew how to give, my silence, my fear, my pride. I hope one day you find the courage to give your child what I never could, presence. Brady's hand dropped. The letter fluttered to the floor, and for the first time since I'd met him, he didn't look like a man, he looked like a boy who'd finally been told the truth too late. Elaine covered her face and began to sob, but even her grief sounded performative, practiced. Melissa walked to her father, hesitated, then knelt beside him. He didn't hate you, she said softly. He just waited for you to see him. Lightning flashed again, and in that moment, I saw them both, father and daughter, framed against the portrait of Victor above the mantel. The resemblance was uncanny, the same jawline, the same stubborn set to the mouth. The only difference was the distance. Decades of unspoken words had built a wall no inheritance could bridge. Brady pressed his palms to his face. What do I do now? The question hung there, small, human, unbearably sincere. For once, I didn't have an answer. Some stories didn't end with forgiveness. They just stopped hurting as much. I took a slow breath, my voice a whisper. Maybe start by staying. He looked at me, really looked, as if seeing the world for the first time without the armor of control. The storm outside eased, the thunder rolling away into distance. The firelight flickered, softer now, the room washed in gold instead of anger. Melissa leaned her head on her father's shoulder. He didn't move for a long time, but then his hand rose, hesitant, and rested on hers. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was the start of one. I turned toward the window. The rain had thinned into a fine mist. Somewhere beyond the glass, dawn was waiting. Victor's voice echoed faintly in my memory, not the recording, not the will, just something he'd said once, when he was still strong enough to smile. Closure isn't peace, Jade. It's just the moment you stop needing an apology. As the first hint of light broke through the clouds, I realized that maybe this fragile, imperfect silence, was his final gift to all of us. Not forgiveness. Just the space to begin again. The house was silent when I left. The kind of silence that comes after something has broken, not from violence, but from truth finally spoken aloud. The rain had stopped, leaving the world rinsed and glistening, every surface reflecting faint tremors of dawn. I paused at the edge of the driveway, the air still heavy with the scent of wet earth and old grief. Behind me, the lights inside flickered once, then dimmed. Through the window, I could see Brady and Melissa sitting together, unmoving, the letter between them like a fragile bridge built too late. I placed my hand on the car door, then looked back one last time. For months, I had lived inside that house, feeding a man the world had forgotten, holding his hand as his body failed him but his dignity refused to. I had thought this ending would taste like victory. Instead, it tasted like quiet, clean and unadorned. Justice, I realized, doesn't roar. It whispers. As I drove away, the morning unfolded in soft color, pink against blue, fragile as forgiveness. Mrs. Peterson waved from her porch again, her eyes knowing, her smile small but true. I waved back, not out of triumph, but gratitude. Victor's photograph lay on the passenger seat beside me, his eyes calm, almost amused. You were right, I whispered. Closure isn't peace. The road curved ahead, sunlight breaking through the clouds. I pressed the accelerator gently. But it's enough to begin again. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever fought for someone who couldn't fight for themselves, or found strength in letting go, don't let it end here. This film, if you believe quiet justice is still justice. With the moment that stayed with you the longest, we read every one. To our channel for more emotionally powerful short films, stories of love, loss, courage, and the human heart at its most raw. Every week, we release new cinematic tales that remind you, even in endings, there's always a beginning.